Well, everyone, hello and welcome to the fifth meeting of Nourish Diversity with Rebecca King and Kind Theory. Kind Theory, as you all know by now, is a neurodiversity education-based nonprofit that's based in the Texas area, but we're doing a lot of education and initiatives that are reaching people online across the US and in some cases even further abroad. I'm the board chair of Kind Theory. I'm Dr. Laura Z. Weldon. I'm neurodivergent myself and very excited to continue learning from Becca, whom you all know by now is a registered dietitian nutritionist from Charlotte, North Carolina, who really specializes in ADHD and disordered eating, intuitive eating, weight-inclusive approaches, all wonderful things that can really help the neurodivergent among us get our nutrition needs met. For the meeting today, we do ask that you keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking so that we don't have background noise. If you want to comment as we're going forward, you can welcome to use the chat box or raise your hand. There are not a lot of people here today, so I think that we have space to answer questions and ask them verbally, but it would be nice if you just raise your hand function so that we don't interrupt Becca when she's sharing good information with us. And today's agenda is fact versus fiction, ADHD and nutrition. I'm guessing we're going to be clearing up some misconceptions, which is great. And our activity will be a game.
Yes, so hopefully I will be debunking some ADHD nutrition myths for you guys today. I wanted to start off with just some general ADHD myths. If anyone would like to share in the chat box, or Laura, you can go ahead and share. Anyone have any myths that you commonly hear, or like even stereotypes just generally about ADHD? It doesn't have to be specific to food. There's so many I've heard. Yeah. Yeah, like someone like you grow out of ADHD, or like I think for a lot of women, if you did well in school, like you can't have ADHD if you got good grades. I hear that one a lot from folks. Yeah. Yeah, we can focus if we want to, or we can control it. Or everyone has a little bit of ADHD. That one always drives me nuts because I'm like, no, we don't all just have a little bit of ADHD, and it's not a light switch you can just like turn on and off when you choose to have your symptoms. Or if we just tried harder. That's another like frustrating myth. Or yeah, if we just got a planner, I think that's another one. If we just got more organized, you would be okay. And it's like, I think you're missing the whole point as to why we might struggle with organization.
In the natural medicine world, there are often myths that it's like just a nutrient deficiency.
Yeah.
And if we just, supplement the right way, it'll go away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, man, if it was just a nutrient deficiency and ADHD would go away, like it'd be a lot easier to treat and manage if that was the case. So too many times it's just laziness. Yeah, I hate the word lazy in general because I feel like nobody's truly just lazy. There's usually some other reason as to why someone may not be doing something they should be doing, or whatever the case is. It's like, someone sitting on the couch, like if you're stuck in like ADHD paralysis on the couch, it's probably not that you're like, I just want to sit here and do nothing. You're probably like in your head spinning, like, why can't I get off the couch and just go make a meal, or go fold my laundry, or, do whatever else I'm supposed to be doing right now. Or I don't even know where to get started sometimes. That's the worst feeling. So there's lots of myths with ADHD, and they can really contribute to ableism. And I think that they perpetuate a lot of stereotypes, misunderstanding, and discrimination against us. So education and awareness can be really helpful with helping stop myths from spreading and perpetuating them as well. And I think social media is great in that sense too, that there is a lot more access to better information and people sharing their lived experiences too with ADHD, which I think is really helpful too. With ADHD and nutrition research, I think one of the reasons there's so much myths around nutrition and ADHD specifically is a lot of the studies that focus on diet supplementation, they've only been done in kids. So like for adults, it's hard to translate some of those findings. They often use really small sample sizes. They aren't very well designed. So a lot of studies won't necessarily blind participants. So like when they do diet studies, a lot of times the parents or the teachers will be who they will look at to or have them fill out like surveys to see how the kids are behaving and things like that, to see if the diet is helping make changes with kids' symptoms. And they won't blind the parents, so the parents will know when they're on the special diet versus not. And so, you know, some parents maybe really want their kids to respond to a diet intervention, so they might say that their behavior's changed. Or with supplementation studies, one of the reasons those can be problematic sometimes is they will use multiple different nutrients. They'll use multiple nutrients in one study. So like iron, zinc, and magnesium are ones that they'll commonly supplement all together in a study. And then you can't really decipher which nutrient is providing which benefit. And they're often prone to a little bit of bias too. So I think that's part of why it's hard with ADHD and nutrition research in particular. So I'm going to go through like 10 different, probably the most common myths that I see around ADHD and nutrition. I forgot to get rid of that little piece, but hopefully I want to make this more conversational too. So feel free to jump in and share your experience or your thoughts. So sugar causes ADHD. I feel like this is probably the most common myth that is out there, but there really isn't definitive evidence that sugar causes ADHD. There are some studies that show a positive relationship between if the more you consume sugar sweetened beverages and foods that are really high in sugar, you might have more ADHD symptoms. But there's also some studies that show that there's no relationship between the two. But I think generally speaking, regardless of whether or not you have ADHD, like limiting sugar is pretty good for our overall health. Doesn't mean we need to completely cut it out, but you know, trying to keep it within like the recommended range, I think is like 25 grams a day, I want to say. Trying to eat less than that, or just being mindful of our sugar intake. Like probably every food you eat shouldn't be something that's like a very high sugar food. So do you guys notice any impact that sugar has on your ADHD? Or have you experienced this myth?
I notice it less with the people that I work with, that eating sugar causes the symptoms to be worse. It's more the fall afterwards into low blood sugar when focus and mood regulation and everything get worse. So by not having that huge spike, you prevent the downfall, which is certainly helpful.
Yeah. We talk with my clients. I'll usually recommend like, you know, having like dessert at the end of the meal. So that way you have, and if you want something sweet, eating it with a meal is going to help because you'll usually have some protein and fat in there to kind of slow down the absorption of the sugar into your bloodstream. Or pairing, if you have something sweet for a snack, like pairing it again with like something that has some fat and or protein in it, again, to keep your blood sugar a little bit more stable. But I find that too, even it's not just sugar, but inconsistent eating patterns too, kind of putting your blood sugar on that roller coaster can really impact symptoms too. So. That there is a diet to cure ADHD. No diet really has been shown to cure ADHD. There are some that maybe symptoms can decrease, but I think it's not a blanket across the board kind of thing where everyone responds to the same type of dietary intervention. I also don't think that there needs to be a cure for ADHD, in my opinion. So I think it's a little bit ableist to be like, yeah, we need to cure ADHD with food. And I always see almost every diet book that exists for ADHD is like how to cure ADHD with diet. And it drives me crazy sometimes. And I'm like, can we talk about like the other things like executive dysfunction and cooking and things like that over, we all need to just cook from scratch and not eat sugar and all these things that often just aren't realistic for most people with ADHD. Omega-3 fatty acids can eliminate ADHD symptoms. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically from fish oil, have been probably the most widely researched nutrient for ADHD. They're definitely not a standalone treatment though for ADHD, but they can be really important for brain health, and they're really helpful for our cardiovascular health too. So if you do choose to supplement, it can potentially give you some benefits for ADHD, but it can also definitely give you some other health benefits outside of that, because most people, especially in the US, often don't consume enough omega-3s from our healthy fat sources. EPA and DHA are the types of omega-3s that have been studied. And EPA appears to be the most important. So there's like an actual dose response relationship with EPA that we see. So for folks, I always see people talking about plant-based sources, and ADHD and fish oil is the one that's been more studied. And plant-based sources like algae oil supplements have a different ratio of EPA and DHA. And so they might not exactly have the same benefits that we see with ADHD. So. And then food additives and food dyes are another big one, I would say, in terms of food mix. There is a potential link between food activities or food additives and hyperactivity, specifically food dye. But this effect doesn't appear universal for all people with ADHD. And it appears to impact a small subset of kids, even if they don't have ADHD. So I think that's important to note too, that like it's not just across the board with everyone with ADHD responds to them, because like I know personally they don't really impact my symptoms a lot. But there can be some kids who actually don't have ADHD that might note it. Their parents or someone might notice they're impacted by them. Some things to think about if you wanted to try and remove some of these things, if you think they're impacting your symptoms, you can always try for a few weeks and see if it helps. But I'd also check in with yourself and see, like, is it worth your time and energy to check every single food label of everything that you're buying, and then also to have to find alternatives. When it comes to food additives, more than food dyes, that might require you to actually spend more time cooking and making things from scratch too. So to see if you have the capacity for that. And if you don't, that's okay. But just before you try to do something and then feel frustrated if you can't stick to it, considering some of these things, it might be also usually a little bit more expensive to buy products that are kind of quote unquote cleaner and not have all those additives or food dyes. So making sure it's something too that's within your means financially to do so. So does anyone notice any impact with food dyes or food additives? Yeah, red food dye. Yeah, and it's one, like, I think the nice part, like if you can pinpoint one, right, it's like, okay, cool. We can look for usually red dye number 40. It's the big one of like trying to find ways to not have that added into our diet. It would be really nice if they just get rid of food dyes, because it's not really that hard to do. And like, I get it, it makes food look really pretty. But we can use other natural pigments in fruits and vegetables and do the same thing. Yeah, that's really funny. This one lady, my friend posted a video of this lady was like, my mom got rid of food dyes and my ADHD symptoms disappeared overnight. And I was like, oh, no, it doesn't work like that. So every ADHDer needs to cut out gluten or dairy. I think overall a good rule of thumb is that nutrition should be pretty individualized to the person, and not every single person with ADHD is going to have a sensitivity to gluten and dairy. And there's actually some research to show that people with dairy, in particular ADHDers, some ADHDers actually benefit from consuming more dairy. So I think just remembering that not everyone needs to remove these things. If you do think that they're impacting your ADHD symptoms, you can always try removing them for at least 2 weeks, especially gluten's one you usually try for 2 weeks to see if it helps. If you think both of these two things are impacting your symptoms, I'd take out one at a time, so that way you know that it's actually gluten or dairy. Food sensitivity tests, I wouldn't recommend using those necessarily to see if you have a sensitivity, because the way that these tests work, anything that you've eaten recently basically will show that you have a reaction to it, because anytime we eat anything, because that's not part of our body, it's a foreign substance, our body has a small immune response to it. So I wouldn't necessarily rely on those to confirm them. Like my friend did one once, and it was really funny because it was like all the foods she recently ate popped up on the food sensitivity test. She was like, I eat all these foods all the time. Now I don't know what I'm going to eat. And I was like, yeah, it's because it just shows up, and we don't really have like a reference range for which ones are good or not. Caffeine worsens ADHD symptoms. Caffeine affects ADHDers and everyone pretty differently. Sometimes it can have short improvements in focus, but consuming too much caffeine, especially on a very regular basis, sometimes can have negative side effects as well. So things like, especially if you have anxiety, you might not really want to consume a lot of caffeine. It can impact our sleep-wake cycle as well. So I think some things to consider as well. And if you take a stimulant, it's not really recommended to consume caffeine with a stimulant because you're basically taking two stimulants at the same time. So something just to be cautious of as well. So yeah, celiac can definitely be a little bit more common too in the ADHD population. So yeah, getting an actual test for celiac, which would be usually doing an endoscopy, would be how they can test for that. But yeah, you can always try a gluten-free trial too. Does anyone find caffeine helpful, or does it make your ADHD symptoms worse? Yeah. It helps you feel more calm too. And then we kind of touched on this at the beginning, but vitamin and mineral supplements can replace ADHD medication. They can be helpful for our overall health. They can correct nutrient deficiencies, and they might fill some nutrient gaps for you too if you maybe don't eat enough or struggle with eating variety. So if you're someone who's maybe a picky eater, or if your medication really suppresses your appetite and you're struggling to get in enough food in general, supplements might be actually quite helpful for you, but they definitely don't replace ADHD medication in terms of how those medications work with our brain. So yeah. And then elimination diets are actually not recommended. They're not really used in clinical practice. Like the few foods diet is one that's often talked about in the research. The Feingold diet, which has kind of been debunked at this point too. There's some promising research with the few foods diet, but the researchers, even in that study, because it's really restrictive and it can take up to a year to work through the whole elimination and reintroduction phase, which is a really long time to be on a super restrictive diet. So the researchers basically conclude that there's very promising results, but it's not really ready to actually be used by the general public because it is so restrictive, and they don't really have like a kind of a way to implement this in day-to-day life. The researchers of this study kind of have people, they're given food and things like that. So it's a little bit different than like, they're someone's, kid's mom going to the grocery store and picking out things, and it's really hard to. And a lot of elimination diets, just like when even cutting out gluten for celiac disease, or low FODMAP, which is another one for IBS, or sometimes I would say the IBS one over celiac or gluten-free, can be very restrictive, and that can put you at risk for nutrient deficiencies. And for kids, that can impact kids' growth. And it just requires you to be more monitored too. So you might want to make sure, if you do consider an elimination diet, working with someone to make sure your kid or yourself isn't going to develop a nutrient deficiency. Again, there are some promising studies, especially for kids who are either too young for medication or not responding, that there might be a potential for diet to be used as a therapy in the future. So, has anyone tried an elimination diet?
There are different degrees of elimination diet. I've never done a full elimination diet, but I have, I don't like to recommend things I haven't tried. So I have gone through a pretty significant, and it uncovered that, gluten really does not help my brain function, which has been pretty important for me personally. But I recommend things the way you've been saying, like, let's try one that's the most likely, and like sustainability and just eating are the most important.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, I always think of eating enough and eating regularly is like the baseline baseline, and then you can kind of go from there. Like I had someone once who wanted to like optimize their eating, and they were only eating like 1 meal a day. And I was like, even if we optimize this meal, quote unquote, it's still, you can't even meet all of your nutrient needs with 1 meal a day. So it's kind of hard to even optimize that. So yeah, there can be the few foods diet one. It's like, I can't remember. It's like almost, I think it's 7 foods kids start off on it, like eating. And if you have kids who are picky eaters to begin with, like it pretty much gets rid of most fruit. And even like things that, I don't know, I couldn't see myself eating as a kid. I was a really picky eater. So it was like, if my mom tried to make me do that, I would just end up not eating, and it would be a disaster. So fasting or extreme diets can reset the brain. These are definitely not recommended. Like we mentioned, eating regular meals is really important for energy and for our brain function. If you do have a history of eating disorders, or even just disordered eating, if you feel like you have a weird or complicated relationship with food, I definitely wouldn't recommend fasting. Even like intermittent fasting, it's not really recommended if you have a history of eating disorders, because it can kind of be a trigger for that because you're restricting in some way. And generally speaking, yeah, our brains like to be fed energy regularly throughout the day. And it's really fun to watch my clients when they start eating more regularly. They're like, man, my symptoms are a lot more manageable when I'm not, eating at 9 a.m. and then not eating again until like 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon. It's pretty cool to see how that little change can make a difference. All ADHDers should eat organic. There really isn't research to support this. I would say consuming fruits and veggies just in general is better than not consuming any at all. So eat what you can afford and access and enjoy. If you are concerned about the pesticides that are on conventionally grown produce, you can clean your vegetables and fruits extra well. They have little fruit and veggie soap things too that you can soak for a little bit longer to help. But yeah, what you can afford and access and enjoy is more important, because not getting in all of those micronutrients, because I've seen that on social media too, of like eating organic is just so, if you can't eat it, then you shouldn't eat fruits and vegetables. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So, and unfortunately, like the dirty dozen and all of those, that marketing stuff tends to do a lot of fear, and actually shows that folks that are low income will consume less fruits and vegetables if they are exposed to that kind of marketing content. So, and organic produce does use pesticides. It's just different types of pesticides than what's often on conventionally grown produce. So they're just considered more natural. I often find fasting isn't not necessarily one for resetting the brain, but I often see a lot of ADHDers lean or want to lean towards it because they don't have to think about eating as often, because it's just that one window of the day. But I think thinking about how your brain and your energy levels are, like how your brain is functioning, is probably more helpful to consider. So. Yeah, I don't think I could fast. I definitely tried to in my disordered eating days, and it did not end up very well at the end. At the end of the day, it was not very pretty. Yeah, it's hard if you like to go do things, or food is something, if you like to go socialize, like if you want to go to breakfast with your friends and it's not your eating window, like just sitting there and having black coffee to me feels like it wouldn't be enjoyable. Or I'm not going to be like, sorry, I can't go because I can't eat. Like that to me just feels like I'm depriving myself some joy in some way. So I figured we do a little true false based on what we just chatted about. So hopefully it'll be a little fun. So I'll give you guys 20 seconds to answer. If you get it right, I'll give you a point. If you get it wrong, I won't necessarily make you lose a point. We won't go in the negatives. So all ADHDers are impacted by food dyes. True or false? Yes, false. some children with ADHD and some children without ADHD can respond negatively to food dyes. Sugar does not cause ADHD. True, yes. Iron, zinc, and magnesium levels are higher in kids with ADHD. I don't think I mentioned my little tip on this, so we'll give you guys a good guess and see it. False, yes. That's often why these are regularly recommended. So the levels in our blood of iron, zinc, and magnesium tend to be lower, which is why these are often recommended as a supplement for ADHD. Does that make sense, Aisha? Awesome. Yeah, we should have mentioned it. I forgot to mention it was going to be a question. Fasting does not reset, or does reset, sorry, ADHD brains. Yeah, there is some like interesting research that the mechanism as to how like each of them are used. That's why it might lead to deficiencies. Yes. Those are good. EPA appears to be the most important omega-3 fatty acid for ADHD. Yeah, I know, because we think of DHA especially too for like pregnancy and all of that. So it's interesting that it's EPA. So food sensitivity tests are accurate at determining food sensitivity. Not true. Caffeine has no negative side effects for ADHDers. No, sorry, I thought I should put true for that one. False, it can increase anxiety, and we tend to be a little bit more prone to also struggling with anxiety. It might make you feel jittery. It can also impact sleep patterns too, especially if you consume it in the later half of the day. It can really impact your sleep cycles. Not for everyone. It's pretty interesting too. There's some research to show, depending on your genes, you can be a slow metabolizer or a fast metabolizer of caffeine. So if you are a slow metabolizer, you're someone who's more impacted by caffeine because it takes longer for your body to kind of break it down and get it out of your system. But people who are fast metabolizers are someone who can probably consume a lot of caffeine compared to other people. So. And supplementation is as effective as ADHD meds. Oh yeah, definitely. Caffeine can definitely irritate your gut too, or coffee in particular can have a laxative effect. So yeah, if you have IBS, it can impact that too. So yes, supplements are not as effective as ADHD meds. One more. If you cannot afford or access produce, aka fruits and vegetables, it's better to consume conventionally grown produce than not consuming it. Exactly. True. Yes. This might be a little bit of a shorter one, but that's all I have for today. So, any Surprises?
The EPA was a surprise for me.
Yeah.
It's a nice tidbit to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of like supplements, you usually want to look for like 1.5 to 2 times more EPA than DHA in a supplement. And that's why the algae oil supplements in particular, they usually have the inverse. I have yet to find one that has more EPA than DHA for whatever reason. So. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Becca today before we finish up?
Any myths I didn't cover around nutrition?
Okay.
Awesome.
No, but we have a love today's session comment, which I will second. Thank you very much for your expertise and time, Becca. This was great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.